Thank you all for being here. I'm expecting some more people to start trickling in over the next couple of minutes, but I do want to get started on time. Make sure you guys get all of your questions in for tonight. I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight, Prakash, by just reading a part of his background. So Prakash is an Agile evangelist and transformation lead in Cisco systems, specifically leading this effort in Cisco Services Technology Group and Services Platform Group. He has helped transform a 2,000 plus member organization to Agile, and the journey it still continues. In addition, he leads several engineering programs in the business unit, partnering with cross-functional teams. I want to introduce Prakash.
Okay. Thank you, Oren.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Thanks, everybody. All right. So, Oren already introduced me. I've been working in Cisco systems since '99. And before that, I worked in Nortel Networks and Bell Northern Research. And I've been doing Agile or some form of Agile, even for a very long time. The predecessors of Agile, where we did more on iterative and incremental and spiral approach, all of those things. I've been working in those areas in the past. What kicked off Agile was the effort that we did around 2007 or so, when we built a next generation operating system in Cisco. I was one of the 3 leaders responsible for the entire operating system to be built. And I had about 3 or 4 teams that were doing various aspects of network management and networking aspects there. And so we built that whole operating system in a truly agile fashion for whatever it was in those days. I mean, we are always evolving what we do in Agile, but I think it was pretty good, very successful what we did at that time. Then around 2010, I moved to another organization called Cisco Services Technology Group, which is where I got several programs that were strictly waterfall. So I was like, oh, let's transform this into Agile, because I was very passionate about Agile with my success in the previous program. So with my enthusiasm, with my passion and all, I started trying to introduce Agile little by little. And we'll talk about a case where we really introduced Agile in a program since May 2012. And I have some data to back up to show the success of Agile for some 3 years kind of thing. But beyond that, because I was so enthusiastic and I showed some success in some of the programs that I had, the head of the business unit asked me to help transform the entire organization into Agile. And that's where the 2,000 people that Oren talked about. We had about 120 programs in that business unit, and we tried to transform as many as possible. I think we succeeded transforming everybody into Agile, and that was the time when Agile was picking up everywhere, actually. So it helped us in transforming them. So many of the things that you see here is learning from that transformation. After that, in 2015, I was fortunate to move into another business unit, which started from scratch. The whole program started from scratch, and I could build it from the ground up in a truly agile fashion. So that was, I'll have in the end some learnings from there as well. But what happened was, all the learning that I had in the transformation of the whole business unit, I applied there to bring it up. It was a cloud native program that we did. So cloud native and agile also goes very well together. Like you want to deploy to your cloud every day, prod deployment multiple times a day. There is no delay between when you think of implementing something and when it shows up in prod, like Netflix or Facebook or any of these people, they deploy hundreds of times a day into their environment. So I was lucky to put this in practice in that environment as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that success as well in the end. So that's a lot about Agile. I know Nandan was asking that if I could tell a little bit more about the foundation of Agile, what it is, what is Scrum and all. This session isn't meant to be that. This is supposed to be, you know what Scrum is, you know what Agile is, and this is more on lessons learned in how to transform an organization kind of thing. So, but I'll touch up on different things as we go along, and you feel free to ask questions as well. Okay, so a few questions we'll talk about. The first three parts, why Agile, what do we consider as Agile, how does Agile benefit us? I'll briefly touch upon them as an introduction into this topic. And we'll spend a lot of time on this fourth item, what do we do to transform to an Agile environment? And then some success stories, we'll talk about that, and more lessons learned, and then summary. So, why do we want Agile, right? We know that software projects fail very often. And what's failure? There are different definitions of failure, but if you look at this picture here, this is a chaos report that came in 2015, and it's a summary of what happened over the past 5 years. I didn't update it for 2016, but it's similar, you know. So you can see that a lot of programs are challenged or failed, and very few are successful, really. So there are some factors, and we'll look at some of those. But in general, larger programs are prone to more failure compared to smaller programs, right? So which means that there is something to do with breaking up the problem into smaller pieces, something to do with getting the feedback, all of those kind of things. There can be the failures can be of different types. It can be cost overrun, it can be time not met, schedule not met, poor quality, product specs not met when you deliver, and customer perceived value is another important thing that they actually added it in 2015, that if the customer thinks that you didn't do a good job, even though you think it's a good job, it's not a good job, right? So these are all the reasons why software projects seem to fail too often. And so what we want to do is to overcome these things, and you can see that a lot of them are to do with what we say we do and we don't end up doing. So which means that feedback from customer, frequent feedback is all very important. So can Agile help? Yes, it can. But you can see that even with an Agile program, there are quite a few failures. You can see almost 23% of large projects, even though they are considered Agile, they are failure. Why? What's wrong with this picture, right? That's because 61% of Agile projects are Agile in name only. And we'll see what we mean by Agile in name. People will say, oh, I'm going to use Agile tools. Now I became Agile, right? Or they'll do some of the Scrum ceremonies mechanically, and then they'll say they're Agile. If the spirit is not followed of Agile, then it will not be successful. Yes?
Rakesh, would this include some of these so-called hybrids where they're trying to use Agile and waterfall, and they are trying to do it? Would that include that group, or is that a different category?
It can include that group, but what do you mean by hybrid is also a question. Now,
Yeah.
if there is a program that is doing waterfall, and if there is another program that's doing Agile, and they need to sync up at different places, the overall program may be considered hybrid, but you can still have success from both the sides,
Right.
right? So that's why I want to be cautious about hybrid.
Okay.
Sometimes people will say hybrid, it could be like this, yeah, you're right, where they're neither doing thorough planning like a waterfall project, nor they're following the principles of an agile project. So then that's where things will fail, right? So what people adopt as agile is flawed. Now, bottom line for agile is, do we meet the customer needs when we deliver something? And that's what is very important that we need to do. When we try to do transformation, it's very important to know what agile is. And when we were doing that, we encountered a lot of different scenarios in terms of when it is done poorly, what happens. So people would do, oh yeah, I'm doing sprints, I'm doing Scrum, I'm doing everything. Here is my analysis sprint, here is my design sprint, here is my development sprint, here is my test sprint. What happened was you took that waterfall project and broke it down into sprints, and you did exactly what you did, just called it agile, right? That's what happens in many cases. People do development in US, test in India. Now, that's not going to be agile. That's not you throw things across the fence, that's not going to be agile, right? People track using agile tools but not follow the principles, right? Mechanically follow the ceremonies. And sometimes people will say, oh, we are agile, we are not going to do any planning. We just start implementing. That's not agile. Agile doesn't mean no planning. What it really means is that what we do in a waterfall, we do a 6-month planning, thorough planning for 6 months. And that planning may not be really successful because you never know what happens 2 months down the road, because there are so many variables that are playing there. Instead, at least in Agile, you plan for 2 months well. It's not that you don't plan, you have to plan. Then only your Agile program is successful. So, people will say, oh, we are not going to do any planning because we are Agile. So these were the kind of things that we encountered when we tried to migrate teams. Now, we don't have proper roles, people with proper roles in the team. There's no Scrum Master, a manager becomes the Scrum Master, and then what happens is that manager dictates everything that needs to happen, and there's no say from anybody else in the team. So, and he's also the Scrum Master and he's controlling everything. It's the traditional waterfall way of doing things, right? Or command and control, or micromanagement, those kind of things. Content, schedule, and resources are the triad, right? Now, if you fix all of them, then it's not agile at all. One of them have to give way when you want to. Let's say resources and content. If you have fixed resources and fixed content, based on the complexity, time schedule will change. Now, we are not going to change the time schedule, we are not going to change the resources, we are not going to change the content, then it's not going to work. So, somebody that does Agile needs to understand all these things, which means the leadership should understand what they're getting into when they say Agile, right? And then, of course, customer interactions. If they don't have any customer interactions, it doesn't matter what you call it, it's not an Agile program. When it's done well, what do we want to do? We want to be able to break up the functionality into vertical slices. This is one of the most critical aspect of an Agile program. Why vertical slices? You want to deliver a cake. You don't deliver horizontal slices of cake. You give the whole vertical slice so that whoever is receiving it can really taste the whole cake. Now, similar is the functionality that you want to give to the end customer. If it makes any sense, they have to have the whole vertical slice. They need to be able to get some UI, get some database, get some backend, all of the functionality so that they can give meaningful feedback. That's where there is a lot of confusion between iterative, incremental versus agile. In the past, we were doing iterative or incremental. Oh, I'm going to build these 10 components underneath for this release. Then I'll build another 10 components, another 10 components. That's iterative or incremental. But when you look at agile, you want to make sure that there's a vertical slice so you can deliver something to the end customer and you bring the feedback from the customer to help you develop additional slices. So that's what is very important when you talk about agile. Now this is a typical picture that you see when agile is talked about, and Nandan, if you want, we can talk about this a little bit more in detail later. This is what it says is that there is a 24-hour planning that happens as part of, there are 5 levels of planning in Agile, really, or even 6 sometimes. The daily planning, and you want to know where you are, what you are going to do that next day, and how you have done, follow up on that. 2 to 4 week sprint planning, then you have a program increment planning, what you can develop and ship to the customer type of planning. You have some releases planning, and you probably even have some themes and some initiatives planning as part of your vision creation, right? So all this planning is there. It's not that there is no planning at all. And then there are specific milestones that you want to do in each of these items. The release planning, sprint review, sprint retrospective, where you learn what went well, what didn't go well. There is an activity called backlog grooming, where you continuously groom your backlog so that you are ready for implementation in the next sprint, in the next planning period kind of thing. So all these things are very important to make Agile programs successful. And these are all very well defined, what needs to be done in each of these phases. And these were the things that we were pushing for with our teams, to understand how you do that. We brought in some external coaches, we brought in some external trainers, got them all trained, and we'll see. We wanted to be with the teams when they're implementing. It's not like you give a presentation and walk away, because you had to be there with them day in and day out to make them successful. The other part is adaptive to change than sticking to a plan is very important in Agile, really. Because when we tried to transform programs to Agile, there were traditional program managers who came in and said, what's your change management strategy? You need to give us a document 20 pages long of your change management strategy. What do you mean by change management? Agile is all about adapting to change. You don't stick to definitely stick to a plan only. You want to be able to plan on a regular basis, and that's your change management strategy. Any changes come in, you are able to incorporate that. Once you get into a sprint, you don't want to change, you don't want to ruffle the team's deliverables. But before that happens, you want to be able to plan that. So, and then another important aspect is to follow the best engineering practices. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard about this or not. The predecessor to what we call Agile happens to be the extreme programming that was very popular in the early 2000s. It actually brought up a lot of good software engineering practices into the play. Agile actually put a framework around it with Scrum and all those things and made it Agile. But the foundation of what Agile is all in these best engineering practices as well. So, pair programming, shared understanding of code, collective ownership, whole team being involved in planning, right? All these are very important. Simple designs, these are required for any good software development anyways. Building quality in sustainable pace means we don't want to, it's called sprint, but unfortunately it's not a sprint really, it's a marathon. You should be able to sustain for long periods. You don't just sprint very fast and then end up not doing in the next sprint kind of thing. So sustainable pace is very important. And all these things are put in a picture like this here, and we can talk about more details if you have questions, but these are generally very common sense kind of things, good software development practices. That's also part of Agile actually. The other next important aspect is the automation. Now, why is this important? This has become, is this different from Agile, what we know of? Is it a different, there was a time when, Agile and then DevOps will do. I'm going to show that DevOps is part of the overall Agile itself. Why is it important? We want to have automated deployment and delivery. Now, I was managing a program, one of the programs. The regression testing was 1 week long for that program. There were some 5,000 test cases that we had to test before we could release every time. And it would take 1 week to do that, and we were always hesitant to do frequent deliveries because we have to test again and again all the functionality to make sure nothing is broken. If we don't have automation, test automation, we cannot release more frequently. How can we do even how can we do 100 deployments per day? How can we do even 1 deployment per day? We cannot even do 1 deployment per week because the testing itself takes so much effort. Automation is very important. Test automation, deployment automation, all of those things. Now, whatever you build into delivery should go through like a code being executed. That's why it's called infrastructure as code. You build your infrastructure as code and you deploy it, and it makes more sense in the cloud environment where you can whip up your infrastructure and tear down your infrastructure very quickly because everything can be done in software, right? So, and then of course,
Can I ask a question?
so yeah.
I'm not super familiar with DevOps, but I'm curious about the development historically of DevOps. Did it come out of ITIL, or was the ITIL Foundation there before DevOps came? Because ITIL was back in the first.
ITIL was there before.
But was a relationship with the two of them? Or
Relationship with it?
was a
Between
relationship
DevOps
with
and
ITIL?
Huh.
ITIL is more for production issues management.
Okay, so DevOps is really separate from ITIL.
DevOps is more of infrastructure, how you are going to manage the infrastructure for implementing the code.
Yeah, ITIL also has processes for
It does.
even deployments,
It does.
Yeah.
not just the
That's
issues
right.
management, but of course you need to follow those principles
Yeah.
when you are automating here. So yes, it is,
Okay,
yes,
thanks, appreciate that.
yeah. And then support. We always used to have in the traditional way, there is a separate support team, and
Right.
you throw it across the fence and they will be struggling to support your product. Now, what we want to do as part of these initiatives is the whole problem comes back to the development team. If we are screwing up something in a production environment, we need to know, we need to fix it at the source so that there is no problem to the customer, right? So all these things bring things more closer, and that's what the whole DevOps is all about. Now, the other aspect of Agile
So
is,
one question.
yes,
Agile and DevOps, do you include the DevOps activities within the scope of the sprint or?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. A developer's work is not complete until they have automated their testing.
So does that mean you don't necessarily need to have testing engineers?
You don't need to have test engineers, separate test engineers. We have rolled in everybody into development. Well, if somebody has some special skills, they are all part of the team and we'll manage it that way, but they're all part of one Scrum team. There is no separate test Scrum team, test team or anything like that.
Are you going to touch on how easy or hard that was to
Yes, yes.
implement in a new team?
Yes, yes. So let me talk about this one, the lean thinking aspect. Very important because we want to make sure all the key principles for Agile are met. And the first one that you see here is to eliminate waste. This is the foundational principle in Agile. And there are all these 7 types of waste. And these are all the ones that guide how we do work in Agile, like partially done work. Now, if you do some work and then, oh, I have to, something is not right, I'm going to keep it on the shelf, I'm going to do something else, I'm going to do something else. Or if you have 10 people in your team and each one is doing their own work and they cannot get their work done because of some other dependency, then they move on to doing something else, then they come back to do this thing. Partially done work, keeping it aside and bringing it back takes a lot of effort. One of the things that we want to do as part of Agile is a concept called swarming, like the bees swarming, Get more people onto a task, get it all done completely so that you don't leave partially done work. Relearning, handoffs. You don't want to developer and then hand it off to test, hand it off to somebody else, hand it off to deployment person. Each handoff is expensive. It's a waste. You want to get it all done together, like that. So each task switching delays, causing defects. You cause a defect now, oh, I don't have time to do, or oh, this is okay, I don't have patience to test this one. I'll leave it, I'll let somebody else find out the problem. It's going to come back with multiple times effort required to fix it later, right? All these things. So these are all the ways that we want to really avoid in eliminate waste. Deliver fast, defer commitment. Defer commitment, let's talk about this. How do we want to plan? Do we want to plan for 6 months and say exactly what we are going to do? Or I can say, look, I know very well what I can do in the next month because I have all the infrastructure, everything is working, I can put this thing together. Then I don't know how my snapshot looks like. Then I'll do the commitment for the next month kind of thing. Versus I'll commit everything for the next 6 months and then come 2 months later, everything that I committed to is wrong because what's happening in reality is not what I thought would happen, right? So deferred commitment is about that. You commit at the time that it is necessary to do. Creating knowledge is similar to not having relearning. Building quality in, we talked about that. Respect the team, optimize the whole. Optimize the whole is more of, you don't want to say, oh, my Scrum team, I'm going to improve everything, we'll do the best job, and I don't care what happens to other teams. You want to make sure that the whole program is successful. Right? So, now, how all these things fit together? This is Nandan's question. Where is DevOps? Where is Agile? Where is this? Here is a picture that I put them all together to say, what we traditionally called Agile was more interacting with customer, bringing the feedback and giving it to the customer kind of thing. XP, extreme programming, is all about bringing the best engineering practices. DevOps is at the back end, deploying automation, all of those things. And then all of it, these principles on lean and systems thinking pervade all that areas. That whole thing is agile, the way what I'm talking about. So there isn't a small part that is agile and the rest of them are not. So that answers your
So
question.
the whole box is agile.
The whole thing that I'm talking about here is what I'm defining as agile. There are a few other principles in terms of what is important, how the leadership behaves, that kind of thing. So just one slide. There is a lot to talk about these areas, but I'm just putting some simple words here. We want to have good leaders that exhibit servant leadership. What does that mean? Make sure that the team is equipped to do its job. Whether it's a scrum master, whether it's a manager, whether it's a coach, whether it's an agile evangelist, or whether it's your VP, they all need to be servant leaders to make sure that the team can do their job well. We want to encourage high performance teams, which means that in creating a team, they go through the normal storming, norming, performing stages, right? Forming, storming, norming, performing stages. Now, you get to the performing stage and then you break them up and put them into another team. They go through the storming again, right? We want to have high performance teams, which means we need to have long-standing teams. And this was a hard thing. Again, people thought, oh, as the demand comes, I'm going to break up this team and create another team for another project. No. Keep teams together and bring work to them. That's the shift in thinking in Agile. You don't want to break teams. And of course, rewards and recognition.
So what is the servant leadership?
So servant leadership is, the leader is like a servant of the team. They may need to make sure that the team can do, they need to provide all the facilities for the team to be successful.
Leader is just an enabler.
Leader is an enabler for the team.
For the team to succeed.
That's true.
There is no longer command and control. You don't micromanage, you don't command and control. You enable the team to grow and make decisions and bring things together. Of course, there is a responsibility from the team members as well to make this
I was just going to
successful.
say, that goes with that other phrase, the self-organizing team. You
Exactly,
need people who are competent,
exactly,
motivated, dedicated,
exactly,
committed.
exactly. So I'll bring it up a little bit in like where we had some of those problems even in the best case where I started the program from scratch and still I had those kinds of problems. It happens, it will be there.
So just one follow-up question. So how does the project manager fit into the servant role? Or
So a project manager would become a scrum master. Now, a project manager,
Not
this is
necessarily.
one of the solutions,
Yeah, not necessarily.
not necessarily. Again, a role of a project manager is very different from the role of a scrum master. Scrum master is a servant leader. He or she asks the right questions so that the answers come from there, from the team. A project manager, in many cases, will say, oh, you will do this, you will do this, you will do this, this is how all these things align. You need to get this thing done by this date, blah, 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 all those things, right? Here, you want the teams to make what necessary arrangements they want to. Now, their individual knowledge some of their individual knowledge is a lot higher than a project manager's knowledge in how things can get done. They'll come up with innovative ways of working together and making things happen. But it requires a lot of facilitation, it requires a lot of servant leadership from a Scrum Master. So that's the change in thinking that needs to happen from a project manager to a Scrum Master or to a leader. Yes.
Because I was going to add, because I've been in these situations, it's a high amount of trust is needed, a lot of trust.
Lot of trust
It's
is
so
needed.
critical.
Yes.
Trust.
Yes, 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 absolutely. I mean, it's not an answer that can come very quickly.
Sure.
Transition to Agile is not so easy. There are all these soft factors that really play in. Again, I didn't put too much emphasis on soft factors because then you can just go on talking about it and you won't have a solution. Absolutely, I agree. That's very important. So, again, this is where I'm going to talk about what got me in all these agile transformations, right? Retaining the original organization structure. There were all these people that had so many test teams in their organizations, so many release teams, support teams. They didn't want to let go. In some cases, they let go some of their people to work in a Scrum team, but then they'll start enforcing, you have to ask for all sorts of documentation for every code drop. And the developers were spending days and days trying to create that documentation for them. Now, what Agile says is, don't waste effort in doing things that are short-lived. If some artifact is not necessary as part of a product delivery, then don't do it. It's just a waste of time. If the developer and the tester were working together, then they would know what needs to happen. But because of this kind of original structure that they were trying to keep, the test team would sit separately and development team would sit separately, and they would not talk to each other, and they'll say, write a 10-page document for your code drop. Waste of time. So we had to beat each one of these issues one by one and try to get them to do what's right for an agile environment, right? The leaders, they didn't know Agile. They didn't, in some cases, there were some leaders that were wanting Agile, some others not wanting Agile, or they didn't care anyway, but they didn't change their behavior. Now, if you don't create the right project vision, if you don't create the right kind of environment for what the deadlines should be, they'll just think in a waterfall way. It doesn't work. You have to deliver in 2 months, no matter what. When you deliver, it's not a successful delivery because you didn't meet all the customer needs. Instead, if you were periodically delivering to customer and getting feedback, whatever you delivered in 2 months was so close to what customer wanted, but of course you didn't deliver everything. At least 80% of the thing that was really meeting the customer need is better than delivering 100% and not meeting any customer need. Right? That kind of thing. How do you manage your deadline is very important. Waterfall structure, delivering in chunks doesn't help. Functionality, they don't know how to slice it vertically and they'll start delivering. I'll give my database related components first. It doesn't help. Right? Automation not being there. Teams, we didn't have proper roles. There was no PO in a team or in many teams. So the customer needs were not reflected with the engineering team. Now, no matter how so-called agile the team is trying to get things done, if the requirement doesn't pass in, they're building the wrong thing, right? Breaking up and reforming teams. And then we also did not define the roles and responsibilities for all the managers. And they didn't have work to do. There wouldn't be a Scrum Master, there wouldn't be a PO, there wouldn't be anything, and what are we going to do? And when they didn't have roles, they were creating more problems in transformation. So all these were the pitfalls that we had to address as part of transformation. So I think there are about 7 points that I bring up in importance from for Agile transformation. All these are part of my blogs in LinkedIn. They have a lot of description details in each of them. Here I've just brought out some pointers here. This is very important, starting with the right vision from leadership. Leaders should know what Agile is. And if they don't, the transformation is not successful. Agile adoption is bottom up, but the transformation can only happen top down. So, and they won't listen to you. The leaders, VPs and all, they don't listen to you. So it was hard. So what I did was to go to other organizations, other companies where there were successful leaders who had done Agile. I brought a VP from IBM to come and talk to our VP and SVPs. I brought somebody from Salesforce.com. I brought somebody from LinkedIn. All these people have done Agile for a while, and they were able to transform our leaders, their thinking. Right? So those are very important to do if you are planning to do transformation in your organization. Forming the right teams is very important. We had individual team members geographically distributed. Everybody is pointing to somebody else. Nobody is available at the same time to do any discussion. No stand-ups are possible. Everybody is just sending a status report and saying, oh, I didn't get it done because this person is not there, that person is not there. We reorganized the whole team structure. It's understandable that in this day and age, you will have people distributed all over the world. But at least you can organize in such a way that at least the Scrum teams can work together so that they can get best things done. And then Scrum of Scrums can be global. So I brought up many of these kind of things in my blogs. You can look at that to a great detail. Filling the right roles, team membership, having the right sized teams. 7 plus or minus 2 is what is advocated. It's because of amount of communication that's required between team members, right? You need that. T-shaped people, very important. What is T-shaped? People should be able to say, oh yeah, I'm willing to pitch in to do that area of work. But they should be able to willing to go deep also. So that's T-shaped people. It's a common definition. And we want to have these kinds of people in your Scrum teams to be successful. And then, of course, provide focus for execution, but they need to have the big picture view so that they know how they are fitting their work into the overall picture. And then long-standing teams, which we talked about already before. And then we talked about this part, organizing to deliver frequently, being able to deliver in vertical slices, very important. We want to make sure that we have feature-oriented teams rather than just component-oriented teams. In some case, we went so extreme to the feature-oriented that we saw some other problem, which I'll talk about in the last slide, how to compromise or how to balance the two approaches.
So one question, if you have like a big project which has multiple Scrum teams, because in one stream there can be only 7 to 9 plus minus 2 people, what was the process of breaking that down into different Scrum teams and assigning it to them?
That is where the whole work comes in. How do you break down that functionality? That's what is very important. And it is always possible to make sure that you can break that functionality well. You want to see what's important to deliver to the customer at any given time, right? Now, there are some 20 capabilities they're asking. You know that 3 of them are very important. And you have finite number of resources. break the functionality among those teams in a vertical slice way, so that this team will do this one functionality, this team will do this functionality. Each team should have their connection with the customer. Each team should be able to feel satisfied that they have delivered to the whole project kind of thing. So we can go full aboard on that one. I'll talk in the last slide where some compromise or where some balance needs to be ensured, but that's. Building in quality, we sort of talked about this, the automation, testing automation, how you want to build your pipeline, deployment pipeline, definition of done. Maybe Nandan may not know this definition of done, but I think you all will know. It's very important to ensure that every type of work item that you envision in here has a criteria for definition of done, and it is satisfied at the right time itself, not stays on and creates more problem down the stream. So a story definition of done, a sprint definition of done, a release definition of done. These are all things that we want to make sure that it is done. This is the one, functional areas and chapter guild ownership. Now, this is what I added here also. If this is not done, then you will end up with problems, because what happens is you have all these vertical slices. There is no common sharing of expertise. And if you look for Spotify, they've done a great job in presenting these concepts, chapters and guilds and all. There are slide shares, there are YouTube videos on Spotify Agile, if you look for, they talk about these things. We had a lot of problems in our UI, but we didn't have that kind of a horizontal way of sharing that expertise and knowledge, because we were too vertically sliced, right? So that's one of the problems that we encountered, and we are fixing that right now. Execution is very important, and it's easier to execute when you have very focused goals, what you need to do. I'll not go through each one of these items here. A lot of them are more Scrum specific, sprint specific, execution. This is the center of everything that you need to do, and you get a lot of explanation on this one. Develop on cadence, release on demand. I have a slide that talks about that. Next slide. But that's again, a lot of details are there, and I think it will take a lot of time to describe that. But we'll see. If you have questions, we can talk about it later. So this is that slide that I talked about, developing on cadence and releasing on demand. What this talks about is, here is the responsibility of the engineering teams, and here is the responsibility of product management teams. We want engineering teams to continually keep on developing, like a factory, right? Here are the program increments, different sprints. They keep on delivering product artifacts, software artifacts. Now, at some time, whether it's a customer preview or it's a major release or an upgrade, you will need some work to be done to pull all things together. Maybe some hardening, maybe some validation, final validation, when everything is working together as a system or not, kind of thing. Although a lot of validation happens here, you still need to do something, and that's the work that happens here. And you should be able to release on demand whenever it's required. In older versions of Scaled Agile Framework, if you have heard about Scaled Agile Framework, they used to talk about releasing a program increment. No longer. That was fixed. Now we can release on demand, because it should not be that we'll only release on a program increment. Anytime we want to release. Now that's how our production deployments can happen at every sprint, every day in fact now. That's what we are doing. So we don't have to wait for a program increment to complete this, or we don't even have to do any hardening to deliver things, especially when it is small bites to deploy and deliver. And that's how all the new companies are working. Netflix, Facebook, Google, all of these people. They do hundreds of deployments every day. I'm sorry?
Probably Amazon too.
Oh, absolutely,
Sure
Amazon,
they
sorry,
are.
yes. They are one of the leaders. So, we talked about the high performance teams. This is another important thing. I talked in the servant leadership area, what they need to do. This again is bringing back the same concept here as one of the most important factors. Continually walking the perimeter as in support of the team and the business. That same statement, right? So these are the 7 important transformation ingredients that I wanted to discuss. Now let's talk about a use case, success use case, what we did and how Agile made it really successful, right? This is about one of the programs that I managed, and we decided to go Agile in May of 2012. And don't worry about these numbers, just look at, well, they are some kind of features, some kind of epics kind of thing that we took up. And this release had 117 epics that we delivered, and then the next release was 207 epics. Next release was 329 epics. I'll tell you about how the team was for doing this, but you can see how the team started delivering incrementally more and more and more. Because they were doing Agile, they were all highly motivated, they saw things moving, they were all enthusiastic in getting things done. There is a blip here, we'll talk about that, I'll bring it up. But I'm presenting the facts just as it is, without any changes. That's why
So
I'll explain that.
So are these like the story points or epic points?
They are a representation of story points, but not necessarily story points per se. It's amount of work, you can just say. It's number of epics kind of thing, right?
How did you measure, in man days, or you had some standard, internal standard?
We had some standard, and it was the same standard that was maintained.
Okay.
And that's another important thing. We don't want to advocate all your estimation be based on man days or man weeks or anything. Because what happens, leaders start comparing one team across the other. We don't want teams to be compared because then people will start playing games. What we want to do is to get the teams to improve on their own measurement as time progresses rather than comparing across multiple teams, right? So anyway, this is the amount of work, let's say, engineering user stories is what I've said from a simple thing. You can see how things improved, right? Another measure is looking at the business, how the business did. When we, in August of 2014, we made about $90 million on this program. In August of 2013, we made about $50 million. And when we started the Agile journey, it was $30 million. You can see it increased 3 times. Why? You will see now in terms of effort estimate what happened, but without considering that, you can see what we delivered was more, what business got was more, and every release was made within 1 week of the deadline, right? Because we could exactly quantify what we are going to do. We were always constantly in touch with what the customer needs. Quality was improved, customer satisfaction improved, and delivery quantity improved, and business return improved 3 times. Right? Now, I'll talk about why that blip happened.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So, if you see, when we started, we had $2 million per quarter investment on this program. As we adopted Agile, we found out that there were some serious wastages within the program. And so we fixed that, and we said, we reduced the expenses to $1.25 million per quarter.
Is this resources or?
Resources,
Oh, resources.
yeah, mainly resources actually. This is software only product, so, right? And then as we matured, as the whole team matured and people were all very passionate, very excited what they were trying to do, we even brought down to 1 million per quarter almost. And that was an optimum value. We could not go down anymore.
So the team members were more productive?
Team members were more productive and they knew how to work together. They became very high performing team like that. Then due to whatever macroeconomic conditions within the business unit, they reduced that to 600K per quarter. And that was a big loss. We lost some very good people at that time, and people were demoralized, the team members were demoralized. They couldn't cope up with that, and that's why you can see that dip that happened.
So was that like people were let go or something?
People were let go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, I mean, I'm sorry?
Or left, I was there at the time, in 2014.
Yeah.
And a couple of them actually left for whatever, this person left.
Yeah. So there was reduction in investment in the whole business unit, and so that's what happened, right? So, but then whoever was left, whatever partial work that was done at this time, they did manage to bring it back up afterwards, right? But there was some impact. I mean, if you add up these two things, it's not really in the same way we could have progressed here, right? But they did do a good job in making things happen. In fact, some of that I've described in my blogs also, how some of that happened. What we could do was, when you're embracing Agile, what happens is, there is a curve in which initial delivery, initial value will be high, and then it tapers off. Now, what we did was, when it was tapering off, we took another portion of another set of team members that were all let go. We took their work and started building it in another sharp rising curve. So that's how we got a lot of work done. I've explained that in my blog. You can look at that. But that's how we ended up getting more work done in spite of all the difficulties that we encountered.
So if you talk in terms of like the velocity definition and all, it went up or?
Yeah, velocity went up, yes. But I want to be very cautious about velocity. When we start putting a lot of emphasis on these just numbers,
Yeah.
people can start manipulating. You want to be careful about that. So anyway, we had long-lasting high-performance teams. We reduced the budget over 70% since it started the program, but the overall productivity improved over 10 times during that same period. 3 times business, 3 times productivity itself. So overall it became 10 times improvement. So that's a success story, right? So that's...
What type of project was it, like in the broad scope?
It's a software project. It was a cloud-hosted program. You would say it's a kind of a network management type of a program where we had about 15,000 customers and 2,000 partners on that.
And how many resources in terms of?
It's probably about 30 people. It came down from 50, 60 people to 30, 20 people.
So there's like roughly like 7, 8 scrum teams or?
4 or 5 scrum teams. Yeah, 4, mainly 4.
How far widespread was that in the enterprise at the time? Because I was working in Innovation Center, pre-sales, those are the areas I was working in.
Oh.
I was over at Tasman,
Okay,
when they were adapting Agile.
right.
So I don't know if that was part of that or an extension of it, or do you remember any of those efforts?
No.
Those projects?
No.
Okay, I'll talk to you later.
This is, yeah, as part of the services group that we were doing this work. So, just now, the last slide in terms of the summary, actually there's one more, even though I said. So, there was always pressure to do either incremental or big bang, and I chose to do incremental. Big bang means what happens, you don't learn from your mistakes, but incremental, we don't want it to be too thin, too little. You want to have some momentum, but you want to learn from your mistakes, you want to learn from what you have done, so that you can build that into the next wave. So do it in waves. That's my advice in terms of how you want to do the transformation. Adoption is bottom up, but transformation is top down. You need to have the leadership buy-in. Persistency, simplicity, you will find lots of problems. You have to persist. You have to make it as simple as possible. Compromise on tactics, but not principles. What do I mean? There were some teams that said, oh, you know, there is a release that is coming up in 2 months, and we want to just plan for that time. We don't have a quarterly PI planning that you talk about, kind of thing they said. Because that's the standardized thing that we did. I said, sure, do it for 2 months. Don't worry about it. It's not compromising on principle, but what makes sense at that time, you could do that, right? Be with the troops on the ground. I mean, it's a ground war, not a air war. You have to be with the teams. You want to attend their scrum teams. You want to see what issues they have. Not all the scrum teams, scrum meetings, but here and there, you know. So, feel accountable, share, oh, sorry. Oops. Yeah. Descale bad behavior. There were this was in the beginning, there were a lot of people that would say, oh, Agile doesn't work, it's not for our environment, there are these problems, those problems. People had a lot of issues. You want to cut it down, because negative sentiments really add up and you will have a lot of problems. So, create interest in people, make it interesting, make it a variety. If it is boring, monotonous, it won't be successful. Of course, open office, active participation, making teams come together with their own identity, their own names, their own team agreements, all make people work together well. And then, so after the transformation, as I was ready to build this whole one program from scratch, there were some things that I learned also. We are creating all these long-lived teams, but what we did was, we kept their responsibilities too static. As business required some changes, we had to get new assignments to them very quickly. But the teams were all stuck up on, oh, I want to perfect this one. I don't want to take up another thing, right? So we just let them do what they were doing rather than giving the new assignments. Now some leaders will come and say, oh no, I'm going to cut this team. I'm going to create a new team for this new project, kind of thing. Then the team has to relearn to work together. Now if a team is working together, highly productive, you can give new work to them and expect high productivity. And that's what was a little too slow from our perspective. Creating these chapters and guilds, making sure that there is a leader in each functional area who can look at architectural view of things was important, which we didn't do very well. We are doing it right now. Developers taking full responsibility for their work. There was always an excuse. They can always say, oh, this thing didn't work, that thing didn't work, somebody else, the dependency didn't work. There was always some excuse or the other that made things not very successful. We want to have developers taking their ownership to make things happen. We also had some unrealistic goals. We are working on an unstable infrastructure which caused a lot of churn and caused a lot of problems. We could have done more focused execution, which some of these things we are taking action to make things happen. But these are all some of the new learnings that, I mean, it's not new really, but in spite of all the successful transformation, we did face all these things. So the whole presentation here today is all about experience and what makes sense, not theoretical. So, questions?
So you mentioned about the documentation, but what sort of documentation was created? I know there is no need to create 20-page or 50-page documents, but still we need to make some documentation for the team to share knowledge within themselves and also with outside.
Right. So one piece of knowledge to documentation to share with the external was relating to how to use the system. That there is no compromise on that. And we had a documentation team and we had our engineers providing all the necessary details that they can write. That's, we don't want to
Was
do.
that part of the Scrum team or?
Yes. Yes. Mostly they were, at least they used to attend the Scrum teams to gain all the knowledge, and they would go away separately and write it up. But that's their work that they were doing.
So they weren't the T people who could do this in addition to?
Well, documentation is a little orthogonal to engineers' capability of writing good stuff.
Often.
Authoring, yeah. So, but yeah, they were giving input. The type of documentation that we said we don't want to do is writing about what features are delivered in a particular code drop and what are all the workarounds that you had to do to deploy that, or what things are caveats are not working, those kind of things, which are really, really short-lived for that 2-3 days kind of thing. You don't need that. If they're working together, you don't need that. Those were the kind of things that we didn't want. We wanted the code to be well documented. All the functionality, what is being done, everything to be done. And some design notes. The architects or the leaders will create design notes so you can understand what's happening.
And again, that had to happen during each.
Scrum,
Scrum,
during the
because,
sprints, during the sprints, no
As you're
separate time.
completing the code, you're describing what it does and.
That's right, that's right. In waterfall, what we do, we write and then we try to implement. I was insisting more on implement and write what you have implemented so that it's easy for somebody coming in to understand what you have done. Because there's no point in writing and then implementing it, and then what you've written is already obsolete because...
Or even 3 sprints down, you're going to want to remember
Yes.
quickly.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what are some of the tools that you used?
For some of the work that we did during the transformation, we were mostly on Rally for Agile management. We now are using Jira, Bitbucket, Confluence, all of those.
Version 1.
Atlassian.
They use version 1 now, too? Version 1?
Version 1, we didn't use, we didn't have a corporate license for that. Yeah.
I want to share this more of a comment, but a personal transformation experience for me with Agile. Again, I was at Cisco, it was in that time period, spring of 2014. I was working on a project called Product Comparison Tool, PCT. This was to laying out to the salespeople, the routers, thinking about how they were going to approach the products and so forth. And I come out of a waterfall background. I go back to those days. So I tend to, look at, we got to be done, this is done. But the team in this instance, we're looking at the social, we had a whole social media kind of element involved in this application. And so I sort of got with it. I got with the team and I understood the importance of working through the crowdsourcing and the social media. So they really got me for it. So it was a really great transitive situation for me to experience that. So
Right.
it was a very positive part of the Agile.
Right, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit, and this might be more, you mentioned you do like vertical slice, so you give the whole like chunk of functionality, not only like a component. So it's like a working software, maybe it does not have all the requirements.
Bells and whistles,
Yeah,
but a
but
working
it's
software
software
end to end,
end-to-end.
yes.
So in that case, how do you do like the high level architecture and design? Is it in the initial sprints or how is that done?
So in some older versions of Scaled Agile framework and all, they used to have a concept called a Sprint Zero.
Yeah.
And there are people that still use Sprint Zero.
How did you implement it?
What we did, let me tell, not from part of the transformation.
Yeah.
The transformation happened because we already had all these projects that were going, they were in flight. So there was no need for a Sprint Zero.
Yeah.
It was a system that was already there. So it was more incremental work. But the work that we did when I started the project from scratch, we didn't do a Sprint Zero per se. We did lots of POC, proof of concept. And as part of that proof of concept, we worked on the architecture. We, I would say perfected, but we at least fine-tuned or tuned up the architecture a little bit, so that when we really launched the program, we already had an idea what's required.
So that was not part of the sprint.
That was part of the sprint. That was a part of a whole bunch of sprints as part of the POC itself.
Oh, so it was a different phase of the project.
It was a different phase of the project, but still, a lot of the work that we did was not to bring it out as a product, but bring it out as a
Feasibility.
proof of concept.
Concept,
Yeah.
yes.
And for that, were the team sizes smaller than?
We had somewhat smaller team sizes because we still didn't have everybody coming out of other programs.
Yeah.
So we were still building that team. So let's say right now we have about 70 people team in that whole effort. At that time we had probably about 25 people, 20 people I would say.
So the proof of concept was already done before you got into the development.
Yeah, I mean, the next planning period, the first planning period was mostly about proof of concept, and the second planning period we started working on.
So for the proof of concept, did you get feedback from customer or?
We did. We did. I mean, sometimes it wasn't necessarily an end customer or it wasn't necessarily a customer. We were also trying out who would be the right customer for that offering, because the thing that we were trying to offer didn't exist.
Oh, okay.
So the customer base wasn't a well-known customer base. So we were trying out that also at the same time as we were trying out the solution.
Trying to meet a customer need that they don't know they need.
Oh.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yep.
So in that case, even the product managers, they become like the internal customer or?
Yes, 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 yes. And they themselves, and including me, we all went to some 40 customers around the world to
Demo it.
find out what they really want, kind of thing. And brought those learnings and put that into our proof of concept, and then validated with them, and then start building on top.
Yeah.
So it was a truly agile, truly customer interacting type of an environment.
So that phase was not in the product backlog. That was more of a proof of
It
concept.
did have its own product backlog.
Okay.
It did have its own product backlog. But then, after a while, we sort of wiped it all out. Not all of it, quite a bit of it, and started.
From
So the POC itself was defined as a product.
Yes, yes.
And you had whatever the agile principles and methodology you follow.
Because it's a functioning system, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
A real customer.
yes, yes.
So I have one more question for the automated testing. Of course, I understand the importance of it, but how did you manage to automate? Because as there are multiple modules or pieces, like the front end, back end, reporting, UI, whatever the so what sort of technology or tools that you use for automation?
Well, two levels of automation. One is just developer testing part of it, which is your JUnit and those kind of things. The other part is our end-to-end functional automation through APIs. We were trying to exercise the whole end-to-end functionality before we release it.
So was that more like UI driven
Well,
or no?
yes and no. There were parts of the UI-driven things, but I'm a little skeptic about the UI-driven parts because it's too sensitive to layout and positioning of your components and all. We did have Selenium-based UI testing. A lot of it was mostly API-based testing because our UIs were also driven through the API.
So the API you use particular tool for the API testing?
I wouldn't be able to give you details on that.
And what about the test data? Obviously, test data is part of the testing, and generation of the test data and then validation of the results also need to be incorporated into the test automation. So that's the one which I'm currently facing, how to automate and how to get the results validated.
Yeah. Basic testing is about system working together, right? So that you don't need much of the test data
Yeah,
for that.
so the test data in the sense, probably I would rephrase it. So the border cases or the border scenarios.
Yeah.
So defining all the border scenarios and then putting the test data, appropriate test data. So that actually, even though we had a lot of thought process went into that, still we missed at least 20% of it.
So I'll tell my personal opinion on that. I don't want to spend a lot of time automating all the border cases. I want to automate the
Majority
of the
That we
main
already
flow
do.
cases.
Yeah, but
You test the border cases once, twice, manually, and leave it at that. Because when you start changing functionality, you don't end up changing the border conditions. You
Yeah.
will change, if it works kind of thing. If it doesn't work, you will know right away. So, as long as you're testing all the main flows through automation, I'm okay.
Yeah, that's what we are also doing.
Yeah.
But still, the border cases, it was constituting anywhere between 8 to 12% of the test cases. So
Yeah.
that's where we have, or the management has concern.
Yeah.
So,
I would be happy with 8 to 12%. I thought it would be more than that,
Yeah.
actually.
but that's what we have found right now.
Right.
We may be missing still
Right.
a lot of other
Right.
things.
So one of the things that we did was to measure the test coverage as well,
yeah.
as we are doing the testing, and we didn't say 100% coverage.
Okay.
Even in that, we would be happy if it was 70% coverage.
Yeah, okay.
But going back to systems historically, it was often exception to kill you.
Yes.
Exceptions to kill them.
Yes.
So to me, the border, I always thought it would be important to at least cover it.
Yeah, our worry was if one border test case is hit, which can possibly bring down the entire system.
Yeah, it's so scary.
Yeah,
It is
but
scary.
you know, the border test case, at what granularity you are seeing, right? Because what happens is when each component builds on the other, or each feature builds on the other, there are interactions that will already
Right.
bring up the border case. So on a system, when you're doing even your happy
The
paths,
end-to-end, yeah.
you will start seeing the border cases already being encountered. So that's what is happening in our case. We haven't done the 100% automation, we haven't had the 100% coverage.
And I agree, because at some point you're investing so much into looking for that 99.9 condition, and it's just.
That is not,
Yeah.
that is not,
Yeah, yeah,
economically, that's not viable.
No,
That's
no,
right.
it's not.
yeah.
What do you do with a platform that has a whole rainbow of functional areas?
Mm-hmm.
And so a given user story or full slice would touch on, 4 or 5 of them.
4 or 5 layers of
Of these
architecture.
functional areas.
Uh-huh.
So it might be, a separate team competence. So if you want to do a team that can handle from A to Z, you're pulling in people who may have a smaller contribution to different parts of the cycle.
Yeah,
How
we
do you
also want to
manage-
make it simple in terms of architecture, not too many layers kind of thing. But then, that's why the T-shaped skills, right? We don't want to have too many specialists in your whole
So that will be
organization.
part of the
We want to-
transformation.
We want to make sure that people are able to do in multiple areas.
Enough of it
Yes,
to be.
you want to have somebody who knows Java, who knows Go, who knows this thing. Maybe a UI person with JavaScript or something is okay, Angular or React or those kind of things, but maybe a UI person, maybe a back-end person
Right,
should be good enough.
Because currently these layers are developed almost independently in a silo.
Which is not good.
And then we bring them together and they're just supposed to, comfortably snap together and,
And it'll never happen.
yeah, the snaps break.
Yeah. Yes.
So one question I had, this is, like you mentioned, this is a software only product. But in my industry, like medical device, we have systems which have both hardware and other components. So as part of the overall program, we follow kind of a phase gate approach to meet regulations. So in that scenario, how would you implement Agile for medical device software?
Yeah. So look at Scaled Agile Framework 4.0. It does talk about a lot of those kind of things. It's a long topic to talk about, really, but essentially you set up milestones where you can synchronize things to come together.
So if one stream is software, that will be Agile, but that falls within the big picture of the overall program,
Right,
something like that.
right.
And then you align the milestones of Agile to meet the overall product development life
Right.
cycle.
Right. I mean, there are teams, there are companies that have done hardware also in an agile fashion.
Yeah, yeah.
Different hardware.
Yeah.
So, but it does take a little bit of effort, more effort to convert hardware into truly agile. Whether that capability exists or not, we need to see. But software, it should be easy
Yeah.
to do.
Is it useful to consider, for example, your regulatory requirements as a customer? So meeting these requirements is part of what you have to do to get the product out.
Yeah, so one of the things that we had to do was to get a Cato ability to operate, Cisco ability to operate for our product, right? That's a regulatory requirement.
Yeah.
And it had a hard deadline. So we brought all the things together and we feverishly worked for 2-3 weeks to meet that milestone and address all the needs, and then we got that ability to operate. You know, so that's the regulatory kind of thing that we need to do.
And then just from a team roles and responsibilities, I think you touched a little bit about it. So in this case, was the Scrum Master the project manager, or was it like different? How did you?
Oh, we didn't really have a project manager per se,
Yeah, in Agile, I don't think there is a project manager role at all.
but there is a release team. Okay.
Get
Oh,
on, get on.
thank you. Release, we had a release team engineer, RTE role.